Hi, my name is Taylor Lindsay, and the title of research study is Don't Forget Black Women, an analysis of Black women's absence in political science. Before I get started, I would like to thank Dr. Jordan Zachary for being a great advisor and for helping me so much over these past couple of months. Additionally, I would like to thank Dr. Whitaker and Dr. Atkinson for being on my reading committee. Over the past couple of years, there's been an increased amount of Black women entering colleges and universities. Comparably, the amount of Black women entering colleges and universities does not match the amount of Black women graduating and heading towards their intended field, such as the field of political science. Additionally, there is a disproportionate low representation of Black women within political science. This caused me to question, what deters Black women from the academic discipline of political science? I use polls as abbreviation. I hope that by understanding what deters or challenges Black women from participating in the discipline, that I could understand the limited amount of Black women in political science and their disproportionate low representation. I name a number of factors that influence their participation and success. Throughout these factors, intersectionality is heavily discussed. This caused me to ask the sub-question, what role has intersectionality played in each barrier to Black women's participation in the academic discipline of political science? I used a qualitative approach because I believe that it was better suited to explain intersectionality and Black women's lived experiences. I identify 4 factors that influence Black women's participation and success in the discipline of political science. The first is one's mental emotional state. Mental emotional state can be explained as Black women's thought processes or their emotions. It can be their implicit preparedness or approaches to navigating the discipline. The second is socioeconomic conditions. This can be their income or wealth. Specifically, I talk about intergenerational wealth, which is the income or wealth passed down from the parents to them. This can influence Black women's initial entrance into colleges or universities as well as the discipline. Social conditions can be Black women's social obligations. Black women are not only students, they are siblings, they are caretakers for their families. Additionally, they are heavily engaged in the Black community, whether that be volunteering or that be engaging in leadership. They also engage in volunteering and leadership on the campus, if you're familiar with clubs such as Black Student Union. Additionally, social conditions encompasses ideas such as sexism or racism, stereotypes, or microaggressions. Here, microaggressions can be explained as someone who demonstrates sexism or racism, but they do so unintentionally or indirectly. Lastly, we have social structure conditions, which means the system or functions of the institution. This factor encompasses things such as the curriculum, professors, advisors, and mentors. I mentioned before that intersectionality is integrated throughout each factor. So here I define intersectionality as the idea that gender, race, class, and other identities do not stand alone, but overlap or intersect. When identities overlap, they can result in multiple measures that can disadvantage or oppress someone. So in this situation, Black women are being disadvantaged or oppressed, whereas being Black is one identity, being female is another identity, and they overlap to disadvantage or oppress them within the discipline. Intersectionality here is provided as a definition. It is also explained that it is an idea, but intersectionality is also an approach, and it is the approach I use throughout my research study. When examining these factors, I found that existing literature fails to distinguish between internal factors and external factors. So if you go back, you'll see that I listed one's mental and emotional state under internal and the remaining are under external. And I did this to emphasize that Black women's thought processes or their emotions are happening within themselves. They may not be made aware or explicit to those around them. And therefore, I believe that it's easy for existing literature to overlook Black women's mental and emotional state for influencing their participation and success in the discipline. Existing literature additionally fails to discuss in-depth intersectionality. As I mentioned before, intersectionality is often provided as a definition or an idea, but is rarely provided as an approach. And we can use intersectionality to understand Black women's experiences, as well as understand the limited amount of Black women within the discipline of political science and overall political science. Lastly, existing literature fails to discuss structural violence. I speak about structural violence when discussing social structural conditions. Structural violence is when institutions harm individuals. So therefore, when universities or the college, if they may be harming Black women by not providing the necessary resources or help for Black women to participate or succeed, as well as they're not ensuring the safety and well-being of Black women. Throughout my research, I refer back to the American Political Science Association's intent to diversify the discipline of political science and overall political science. And I found when examining APSA is that a lot of their research or their journals uses quantitative research. And quantitative research does not consider or control for the overlapping of gender and race. When examining, for example, I found that many of the journals or the research would discuss Black individuals or the African American community, and they would discuss women, but they would not specifically discuss Black women. So oftentimes quantitative data does not allow us to discuss the complexity of intersectionality, but qualitative data and using Black women's experiences allows us to. As I mentioned before, I did not take a quantitative approach, but chose to take a qualitative approach. And I did this because I believe it's better suited to understand the complexity of intersectionality and Black women's lived experiences. So I turned to two theories within qualitative research. The first is Black feminist theory, which is a theory in which ideas are produced by Black women that clarify a standpoint of and for Black women. It uses Black women's lived experiences as learning strategies to adequately understand intersectionality as well as understand representation. So in this study, it would be the low representation of Black women. Additionally, Black feminist theory can be used to address diversity or diversify the discipline of political science. It's not limited to researchers or intellectuals. Anyone or all Black women can use or turn to Black feminist theory. It stems from standpoint theory, which is defined as a theory found in academic disciplines, which is used for analyzing intersubjective discourses. Standpoint theory argues that existing literature or research overlooks minorities, and standpoint theory can be used to make visible minorities, or for this study, Black women. It offers critiques and it offers alternatives to existing literature that would better suit understanding Black women's lived experiences as well as intersectionality. I turned to ethnographic and autoethnographic research to conduct interviews. Ethnography and autoethnography is informed by and very similar to Black feminist theory in the way that it turns to Black women's lived experiences. It focuses on the personal and social life and experiences of individuals, or in this case, Black women. It studies how Black women act within themselves as well as outside of themselves and the environment that they are in. Ethnographic research will be focusing on the other Black women that I am interviewing and their personal and social life and experiences, whereas autoethnographic research focuses on the researcher. That's the only difference between the two. In this case, I am the researcher, so I would be focusing or sharing on my own personal and social life and experiences. So my answers are also integrated throughout the interview findings. I interviewed Black female students attending the University of North Carolina, Charlotte as political science majors, or at one point they had been political science majors. I interviewed Black women, each at a different phase in their academic career. And I did this so that you could see the endurance or the continuation of them participating in the discipline of political science. So the first phase was a Black female student who is interested and attracted to the discipline, but has not yet entered the discipline. So this is sort of the initial start or entrance into the discipline of political science, where maybe they've classified themselves as a political science major, but they haven't really dwelled into the curriculum or the classroom environment. The next phase is a Black female student who is a current student in the discipline. And as I mentioned before, I'm creating or conducting autoethnographic research. So I would classify as a Black female student who is currently in the discipline, but I wanted to get some additional insight and go beyond myself, so I also interviewed another student who is a current political science major. The next phase is a Black female student who changed from the academic discipline of political science to another discipline, and I find this one to be very important because from changing from political science to another, we can get some insight into maybe why this student did that, where there are challenges that match up with what I've discussed in my research study, or what ultimately deterred her or made her change from the political science discipline. And lastly, a Black female student who graduated from the academic discipline of political science. So this just allows some reflection of being a political science major at a college or a university, as well as how they're headed into the political science field and how this next jump into their life can provide some insight from going from a university and out into the real world. On the right, you will see the questions I asked during the interview process. So number 1, what initially interested or attracted you to the academic discipline of political science? And for the most part, subjects answered the same for this question, but I will discuss this more when discussing the interview findings. Number 2, what has been your experience with political science curriculum? Have you seen yourself reflected in the curriculum? And number 3, what has been your experience with mentoring? Have you seen yourself reflected in the mentoring? So when I ask, have you seen yourself reflected in the curriculum or the mentoring, I mean, do you see yourself as a Black woman and your personal experiences? Do you see those experiences being discussed or represented in the curriculum or with your mentors? Number 4, what challenges have you faced in the academic discipline of political science? This question was kind of see if the answers match with the factors I identified that might deter Black women from the discipline of political science. But for the most part, subjects answered the same way for this question. And once again, I'll discuss that when discussing interview findings. Number 5, why did you stay in the discipline? And number 6, if you did not stay in the discipline, why did you leave? And I asked this question to see if, when discussing why they left or what influenced them to leave, if that pairs along with the barriers or the factors that I identified. And lastly, what factors led you to the academic discipline of political science? To what extent have you thought about the factors that led you to stay or leave? So when answering these questions, subjects referred back to previous questions. So I basically found number 7 to be conclusion or summarizing everything they said, but to what extent have you thought about these factors that led you to stay or leave? So we're examining their lived experiences, their personal accounts, but I kind of wanted to ask, have they thought about their lived experiences? Do they think about what they went to on a day-to-day basis or week-to-week basis while being a political science major and within the discipline, even the classroom climate or the academic environment? You will see that I did not interview individuals who were not Black and female, and although it would be very interesting to conduct a comparative analysis between those who do not identify as Black or female to Black women, I feel like this takes away from the point of Black feminist theory and standpoint theory. I use those theories to get a better understanding of Black women and their lived experiences. And when using comparative analysis, I feel like individuals who do not identify as Black or female would become the reference point, and no longer would Black women be the main people being studied, but they would become the outlier or the deviation when compared to the reference points. So therefore, I only interviewed Black women as political science majors on University of North Carolina Charlotte's campus. So these are some responses to the interview questions, and I organized these responses according to the factors that influence Black women's participation and success in the discipline of political science. So this one corresponds to Black women's mental and emotional state. If I step out of line or have outside behavior, I am going against standard behavior. If I am passionate about political conversations within the classroom, it becomes a mess. So I try to avoid making a mess. When discussing Black women's mental and emotional state, the recognition of the concurrence of their identities can cause Black women to implicitly prepare themselves for the experiences and challenges they will face as a Black woman. So in this situation, the subject implicitly prepared herself to try to avoid making a mess within the classroom environment. And I see when examining most of the subjects that they expressed a feeling or preparedness to remain quiet within the classroom or to remain kind of separate from the classroom and to just act accordingly to the classroom environment or the classroom climate. And this becomes a problem because often Black women find themselves responding or acting desensitized or numb within the classroom. Instead of being passionate about political conversations, they decide to remain quiet. And I ultimately argue that in becoming desensitized or numb, you further lose that passion. And then there's a chance that you may think one day, well, why am I here if I'm no longer passionate about my work in political science or as a political science major? What am I doing? And so you could ultimately deter from the discipline. If you do not deter from the discipline, your contribution to it may be a little bit less because you're no longer passionate in your work or interested in what you truly wanted to do. When interviewing the subject who left the discipline of political science, she expressed that she was no longer passionate or enthusiastic about her work, and she felt that her contribution no longer impacted those similar to her or surrounding her. And not only did she feel that her contribution no longer impacted those around her because she was less passionate or enthusiastic, she felt that she wasn't giving her all to her work, but additionally that the discipline was limiting her contribution for others. When discussing socioeconomic conditions, I focused on income or finances or intergenerational wealth, how income or finances are passed down from the family to the Black woman. But when interviewing subjects, I found that they did not discuss socioeconomic conditions in terms of income or finances, but they discussed it in terms of family and family resources. So one subject asked these questions: why do Black families experience less favorable socioeconomic conditions? Why are things the way things are for Black families? So what she did was take her backstory and her lived experiences, her questions about her life, and she wanted to learn more about it. When she asked the question, what needs to be done or fixed according to these experiences, she felt that in becoming a political science major, she could learn more about people like her and hope to help people like her. Other subjects expressed that their family's background in political science is what influenced them to become a political science major. So when discussing in my research studies socioeconomic conditions, I believe that poor socioeconomic conditions would deter or challenge Black women from participating in the discipline or ultimately just attending college, but it seems that socioeconomic conditions is what influenced their decision to become a political science major. Now, there was one subject that expressed that she was never worried about the financing of college or just college debt when entering the discipline or the university. But now that she's about to graduate, socioeconomic conditions becomes a problem. So that you can tell from that maybe socioeconomic conditions may not be a problem from entering the discipline, but it may become more of a problem when exiting the discipline or graduating from college. If we think back to interview question number 4, it asks, what challenges have you faced in the academic discipline of political science? And I mentioned before that most of the subjects answered this question the same. And it was that they felt that the biggest challenge was interacting with their peers or navigating the classroom. One subject expressed, I attempt to engage in group assignments and projects, but my peers don't engage with me. They often overlook or set aside what I have to say. They perceive me as not understanding the topics, or they expect me to stay quiet. And across the interviews, this is what the subjects express, that they have a hard time working on group projects or group assignments. Often they don't receive the recognition they deserve. They might say something and it's overlooked, or another student will say exactly what they said and that student will get the recognition. Personally, for me, I agree with this as well. I have experienced some microaggressions, or maybe a student said something that was offensive towards being black or being female or being a black female, but I believe that they were unaware of what they said or the impact of what they said, that it was very unintentional. Additionally, I've examined that when we're discussing subjects or topics within the classroom, such as being black or being female, that the classroom climate changes. Sometimes there's a tension, or it seems like my peers are uncomfortable with speaking about the subject matter. At other times, it seems that my peers are disinterested in the subject matter. The black female subject, who currently is a political science major at the University of North Carolina, Charlotte, as well as myself, both agreed that we see more individuals who look like us, that there are more black women in the political science classroom. Personally, I believe that I do see myself reflected more in the curriculum, especially in my class, like Women in Politics. We did spend a great amount of time discussing black women and black feminism. But there are at other times where I feel like when we discuss black women, we are always referencing back to a standard, like what I mentioned with comparative analysis, that we don't specifically focus on black women and their accomplishments, but that we are comparing them to a reference point. Comparably, one of the subjects felt that they weren't reflected in the curriculum. They expressed, I was absolutely not reflected in the curriculum. Both my closest professor and my dissertation advisor were supportive of me, but did not share my identity and my identity politics. They can't relate to being a young black woman. Many of the subjects expressed that they reached beyond the University of North Carolina, Charlotte, or did further networking to meet individuals that shared their identity and their identity politics, that most of their advisors or mentors who were black and female were relationships formed outside of the university. And then the subject continued to express, there was this feeling of being constrained in the type of research I could do. Politics of academia was narrow and exhausting, especially around race and gender. And again, a lot of the subjects did express the narrowness. They felt that they had no space to carve out for themselves within the social structure of the discipline of political science. And this is where I go back to structural violence. that when institutions or discipline are harming Black women by maybe not providing the help or resources that Black women need, or not ensuring the safety or well-being of Black women, that they're contributing to structural violence. So by not having the adequate advisors or mentors for Black women, or maybe for not assisting them in their mental and emotional conditions, their socioeconomic conditions, the experiences that they have with their peers or within the classroom, that this is contributing to social structural violence. And ultimately, this could lead them to leave the discipline, whereas they feel that they're being harmed in this way, or that maybe they're not receiving the guidance that they need to continue within the discipline. In conclusion, the amount of Black women in the discipline of political science corresponds with the amount of Black women in political science overall. The limited number of Black women in the discipline of political science cannot be addressed until the barriers to their participation and success in the discipline are addressed. And once we address their disproportionate low representation in the discipline, then we can begin to address that in political science overall. When we examine the barriers or factors to Black women's participation and success, once we understand them and address them, then we can work on how Black women navigate the discipline so that they may head into their professional career in political science. The barriers are further convoluted by the role of intersectionality. As you see, as we discussed every factor, that we should focus on the discussion of being a Black woman, that we should not discuss in the broader sense of just being a Black individual, or that we should not discuss in the broader sense of just being a woman, but that we should address the complexity of intersectionality. We must acknowledge that Black women are different, but we should not compare these differences. We should just focus on understanding and learning from Black women's differences. So thank y'all so much for listening to this presentation. I know that we usually carry out presentations within the political science department in person, and I know that we usually do questions and responses at the end of every presentation. So feel free to shoot me an email if you have any questions regarding my study. My email is tlindsay@uncc.edu. That's TLINDSA7@uncc.edu.